A very good morning to everyone. I'm Shweta, Senior Project Associate at the Sustainable Landscape and Restoration at WRI India. On behalf of WRI India, I'm honored to welcome our esteemed speakers, participants for Connect Karo 2023 session on inspiring and enabling action on reducing food loss and food waste in India. As we strive to build sustainable and equitable food systems for all, this session presents the right opportunity to deliberate on critical issue of food loss and food waste that is seen to have high impact on people, nature, and climate. This session will focus on highlighting food loss and food waste as a critical step for addressing of food and nutritional security, environmental impacts, and economical losses and livelihood. Today, we are joined by a diverse set of experts from the government, inter-government and donor organizations, food businesses, research institute, academia, civil society, and others. The session will focus on cross-learning, on best practices and collaborative strategies while sharing key recommendations from India's latest T20 policy brief. So before we dive into the discussion and cross-learning, it is crucial to understand what is food loss and waste. So as you can see, food loss is basically that happens in start of the supply chain. So FAO defines food loss as the decrease in the quantity of and quality of food resulting from decisions and actions by food suppliers in the segment of supply chain, excluding retail food service providers and consumers, also known as post-harvest losses, in-transit and pre-consumer losses. And while food waste is the decrease in the quantity or quality of food resulting from decision and action by retailer, food service provider, and consumer. So food loss is often referred to as unintentional losses, which happen due to causes such as poor infrastructure, lack of cold storage, and out-of-date machinery and infrastructure. While food waste, on the other hand, is said to be more of intentional wastage, which happens due to poor planning, poor cooking practices, and others. So there's this one question that often comes to us is why do we even need to separately define food loss and food waste? So the reason is, first, it happens at different supply chain stages. So food loss happens from farmer to retailer, while food waste happens down the side on the retailer and consumer. So the supply chain stage differs. The stakeholders, for example, are more from food loss farmers and wholesalers and traders, while food waste are mostly consumer. So talking more about the scale and impact of food loss and waste. So the global scale, so imagine you go to a supermarket, you take 4 bags of food, and then you drop one on your way back to home. This is exactly what we are doing right now. We are wasting a lot of food. And we are wasting a lot of food at the consumer side and also a lot of loss during the farming and post-harvest side. So the global impact, around 40% of the food produced is lost or wasted across the supply chain. 24% of the world calories go uneaten due to food loss and food waste. And the global impact, so it is important to understand that all the resources that go into production of the food also get wasted when we waste food. So 1/4 of the fresh water used in agriculture goes to waste. There's all the fertilizers inputs that go into production goes waste. Looking specifically at the Indian context, so an economic loss of 1.5 billion rupees, 18.5 USD is lost in post-harvest losses of about 54 commodities. And a huge amount of food waste happens at the wastage side at the consumer household. So food loss and waste has a separate SDG, that is the SDG 12, which focuses on responsible consumption and production. But also it is relevant to a lot of SDGs because reducing food loss and waste offers opportunity to improve livelihood, income of farmers, and then improving nutrition and food security. So there is a lot of linkages with other SDGs. So it's a win-win situation for achieving all the SDGs as a strategy. So WR India has been forefront, like a leader in doing research on food waste and food loss. So a study undertaken by WRI-India and Food Loss and Waste, Food Loss and FOLU Coalition the research findings show that there's a need for identifying magnitude and hotspot of food loss and waste. It is important to understand where the food loss and waste happen in the supply chain, and also there's a need for adopting a harmonized a harmonized yardstick for measuring. For example, what might be relevant in one definition might not be relevant in another. So, and the third point, there is a need for building a coalition for guiding research, such as social, economic, and environmental impacts of food loss and waste. Now I pass on to my colleague Ruchika Singh, who's the Director of Sustainable Landscape and Restoration at WRI India, for discussing next the India's T20 policy brief.
Today, I wanted to discuss findings that we, submitted as part of as a T20 policy brief. This was done collectively with WRI India, WWF India, Center for Responsible Business, and Food and Land Use Coalition. So, we submitted this, and I think this findings have been well received. And we wanted to share a bit more, what our recommendations are, and potentially what India could do in this context. And we have a very excited for the panel discussion coming up in terms of potential reactions on the coming on this. I think this doesn't need much explanation because Shweta laid it out quite well. The only point that I want to make is the plate that you see there. This is from Connect Karo, happening right now. When we talk about responsibility on food waste, it's also about all of us as consumers. What we are doing in our daily lives as action would be equally important. So that 40%, of food getting lost or wasted includes all of us. So we are equally responsible for that. I think that's a key point that I would like to highlight. Of course, it's important as a climate mitigation strategy, and there are key government stakeholders and private sector stakeholders and consumers, and how we think about all of them together is very, very critical. And this is from some of the learnings that we've had globally in terms of what really are the key drivers and challenges when we think about reducing food loss and or waste, and the strategies are very different. You can't have one bucket sort of strategy for both food loss and waste. You need to think about it in a segmented way, and these are structural issues. We really do need to think about what the economics is, what are the climatic conditions sometimes because of which loss or waste is happening, who are the demographics which we need to think about, how do we think about awareness, access to finance, etc. So there are a lot of complex issues that we need to deal with, and a lot of solutions which could be technical or managerial but also behavioral. So looking at a larger context of drivers and challenges, there's a lot of issues, and if none of these are addressed, then food from the supply chain ends up getting out of the food supply chain, or not used for human consumption. Sometimes it could be as simple as appearances, which, I mean, it's probably very good food which you could have, apple or orange, but just because it's slightly mushy, it gets wasted. So it's a whole set of complex issues that we need to think about when we are thinking about reducing food loss and waste. One approach globally tested that's being talked about, which can help really different sort of stakeholders to think about how do they reduce food loss and or waste, is the Target Measure Act approach. And a lot of governments and companies globally are starting to follow it. Champions 12.3. 12.3 is the SDG 12.3, which Shweta mentioned quite eloquently. So how do we sort of look at meeting adopting a target of halving food waste, which SDG, halving food loss and waste. So there are two targets within the SDG 12.3. That becomes important to look at. How do we measure becomes important. Till we know the what the hotspot are, what methodologies are, it very, and where across the supply chain the loss is happening, it's very difficult to sort of think about what strategies could be taken. And of course, acting is very important, because at scale, what different sort of partners could do across the food supply chain is crucial if we want to sort of look at what needs to be done. So essentially, it requires a Target Measure Act, and this is what I think when we were looking at collectively what the G20 presidency this year is in India. Last year it was in Indonesia. Next year it's going to be in Brazil, and there has been a constant discussion on food loss and waste, which is actually very good news for all of us. So what we can do jointly together becomes important. The Task Force 3 specifically in this year was deliberating on how we create issues around mass movement, sustainable consumption, and what every stakeholder, for instance, could contribute contribute for a green transition. This year's G20 agricultural ministers meeting also identified prioritization of food loss and waste in order to achieve SDG 12.3. So they are really good sort of, we are seeing good signs of, and this is now coming on the agenda, which is great. We all know who the G20 countries are. One of the things that we've been also seeing is a lot of focus on G20 countries on the global south. What can be collectively done? And when we were writing out the T20 policy brief, our focus was there's a lot to learn for G20, but also non G20. So some of these findings are equally sort of, there's a lot to learn, from all of this. And it's important because the G20 is almost 85% of the global GDP, 75% of the global trade and GHG emissions. Of course, two-thirds of the world population, but 60% of agriculture in worldwide. So the reason why within the G20, how we also, we're talking about food loss and waste this year with, hoping to continue this conversation with Brazil next year in terms of how we think about reducing food loss and waste. And it's not that nothing has been done. The good news is there are a lot of challenges when we talk about that target measure act approach that I mentioned earlier, but there is also progress that we are already seeing within countries in terms of reducing food loss and waste. So if I give an example, there are lack of climate targets within the NDC for the G20 specifically on food loss and waste. I mean, there are few, not many have that. So that becomes critical to look at. But we see that almost 55% of the global population have specific targets in context of the SDG 12.3. So how do we sort of, think about targeting a bit better? The measurement, of course, can't be reinforced more, is quite important in terms of how we think about hotspots, standardized measurements that are important. And what we again see when we did the analysis was that only again in a handful of countries are looking at food loss and or waste across the supply chain. Sorry, there's a lot of details here, but this policy brief is available online if you want to have a closer look. But the countries in yellow are essentially the G20 country members. And what we see is there's still more done on food loss or post-harvest losses. Food waste is much lesser, even in some of these measurements that are mentioned here. And when we come to ACT, we see that the challenge essentially is how are governments prioritizing, or different stakeholders prioritizing food loss and or waste within their strategies. What actions are they potentially thinking about? And who is taking that action becomes important at scale. And so essentially, we looked at mapping out who are the key actors and what potential benefits they could have if they are reducing food loss and or waste across their supply chain. No surprises. There are a lot of key stakeholders that we see, from governments, businesses, farmers, consumers, and civil society, that we need to think about. And the benefits are important to look at. For governments, it could be self-reliance in agriculture. We know climate crisis is hitting us very hard here in North India, where a lot of us are already facing a brunt of it, and this is going to continue, right? So how do we think about more self-reliance in food will be very critical for, I mean, if I take the Indian example, continued with the climate sort of, impacts that we are facing. How do we reduce GHG emissions? For businesses, it can improve efficiency in supply chains. Very important. I mean, you want to think about the economics and how do we make, supply chains more efficient. For farmers, it could help in improving income and livelihoods. For consumers, of course, it can also help in reducing, household expenditure. I mean, if we, don't buy that much and we are more efficient with it, it could lead to healthier and cleaner cities. And of course, civil society itself in general, I think we are all very committed, or we like to believe that. So, it helps us to go towards that targeted mission that we have of how we mitigate crisis, but while thinking about, equity and livelihood benefits that have to, which were all important. So we basically have three recommendations that we came up with for the G20 countries. Set explicit targets on food loss and waste. Think about measurement, specifically how you could support public-private partnerships to understand the scale of the problem, and inspiring action through a very targeted approach of incentives, policies, and investments that can flow. Very briefly, talking about in the context of G20, one of the things that we sort of spoke about, only few nations, as I said, and mostly it's non-G20 members who've made a NDC commitment. So can we have explicit NDC commitments, and then we also think how we measure, monitor some of that. India did updates its NDC. It includes a larger focus now on sustainable lifestyle for consumption. But again, how are we going to measure? What are the issues? How do we sort of look at that? And can this be more explicit? Would be a question that would remain there as well. The G20 government could also encourage businesses to set targets and explore public-private partnerships. Very crucial when we think about how we can inspire action within the G20 countries. European Union actually quite recently proposed to reduce their food waste by 10% and manufacturing and food waste, especially by 30% capita for all member states. Really, I think important sort of legislation which can help in taking things forward. Similarly, I think our second recommendation to the G20 country states is how do we enable measurement of food loss and food waste through public-private partnerships. It's not necessary always that governments only have the role to play. I think we could do this through a good public-private partnerships, and what a standardized methodology is would of course depend on the local context. So you don't have to use one sort of a standardized approach, but this can be customized. We have several good examples of public private partnerships that are emerging. The Australian Food Pact, where there was a lot of focus on food waste specifically. I'm sure Mihil would talk a little bit more about United Against Waste campaign and the Kotlat commitment, where across the food supply chain in the UK, how things could be reduced. We've examples of very innovative what RAP did in UK, where worked with municipalities to see how food waste could be reduced, is another example. So there is a lot of these good sort of examples that are emerging. India, of course, did the post-harvest loss assessment. The last one came out last year. So there are some examples, but we need to see how some of these. We need better data still. I think that's not sufficient is what we are also sort of agreeing on. And the last recommendation that we have is on inspiring action through a targeted approach of incentives, policies, and investments. And here different sort of stakeholders would have a key role to play. When I think about policies and incentives, one example that comes to mind is, do we have laws which actually help in donating? Like, some countries have good Samaritan laws. Do we have something like that? Because that could really help in taking forward things a long way. How are we thinking about awareness, capacity building? Also can be done through schools. WWF has some good examples emerging from some of the work they have done. So how do we enhance cooperation, cross learning among different G20 nations, and different really supporting technological innovations becomes important to look at. And one of the things that we are trying to do, and I see a lot of friends as part of this group today here also, is in India trying to see if we can bring together a coalition of partners who can really mobilize action through food loss and waste. We have green pods here, we have OTP, we have India Food Banking. Well, we have a lot of partners. We know that the problem is too difficult. We really do need to work collectively to see what we can do on this. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to my colleague Shweta. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruchika. So now we'll be moving on to a moderated panel discussion. Please welcome Ms. Devyani Hari, Director at Center for Responsible Business, who will be moderating the panel discussion and help us steer a meaningful dialogue. Mr. Mihil Van Erkel, Agriculture Counselor for India and Sri Lanka, the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands, who will bring in his learnings on FLW from Netherlands and Indian context. Dr. Devendra Dhingra, Principal Scientist as the Process Engineering at the Agriculture Engineering Division of ICAR. He brings in his knowledge and expertise in post-harvest engineering, reduction in post-harvest losses, and development of technologies. Mr. Sridhar Eswaran, who will be joining us online, who's a head at Samaniti Foundation, who brings in his experience in finance, institution and capacity building, agri-tech and strategic partnership. Dr. D. Somshekhar, additional MHO2 at Public Health Department, Municipal Corporation of Delhi, who will bring a public health expert who will bring in his sharing key initiatives undertaken by MCD to tackle food waste. And Ms. Vandana Singh, CEO of India Food Banking Network, who will be sharing her experience in collaborating with food industry stakeholders to promote food donation. And Dr. Ruchika Singh, who will be sharing key gaps in research. Over to you, Devyani.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this discussion. First of all, a big thank you to Shweta and Ruchika for setting a wonderful context and really enthusing me for this discussion. It's always a pleasure to, cooperate with WRI, WWF on this important topic. And I think for me, it was very important you laid out that this is important, right? We know why we need to do it. The good news is that we are beginning to see action. The challenge is that we really need to accelerate, we need to collaborate. So, the purpose of this panel, and I'm very excited, is to learn from them more, on what is happening on the ground, what are their experiences, and what is it that we can do to scale up. But before we do that, what I would like to request our dear panelists is that you heard the recommendations, you heard some of the actions that we placed in the T20 brief. And, as somebody who's practicing on the ground or in your fields, I would like to invite some reactions, and I'm afraid I'll have to be a little strict with time. So, requesting each of you to keep your remarks to 2 minutes. If you can start with some reactions and what stood out for you in the brief and something that you would like to highlight. So, if I can, Mihil, I'd like to start with you.
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure being here. It's one of my favorite topics as an agricultural counselor, or maybe more as a human being, because I'm also a consumer and we all eat. So this is really close to my heart. And I'll admit, I also sometimes waste my food, to be honest. Don't we all? First of all, Netherlands not being a G20 member, but we were there. We've always been there, and we're an EU member, of course. What I really would like to emphasize in the report is the importance of measuring. I think it was mentioned, we have some good examples in the Netherlands of how important it is to have this zero-based measurement first. And I would like also to stress the financial benefits. It has been mentioned in the report, financial benefits that for retailers and consumers, as you mentioned, but especially for retailers. I'll just give you an example. I'll be cutting the grass in front of my own feet. But if a retailer invests $1 in reducing food waste, he can gain actually $14. I mean, this must be an extremely good incentive for retailers. And secondly, finally, I think the holistic approach that you have done, connecting how the importance of food waste, food loss to climate change, to food security, things like that. I think those are the things that I would pick up from this report. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. Dr. Dhingra, if I can come to you, sir.
Thank you so much, and thanks to WRI-India for organizing such a wonderful event. We are into this field for the last, ICR is for more than 50 years or 60 years, ICR is doing this. Our institutes are working on it. When I looked into this, it seems like a lot of work has been done in the presentation. So food loss, right? One is food loss, which is happening from harvest to retail, right? When it is moving, where the food remains mostly within the organized sector. So there is the loss, it is happening. We are not doing it, but it is happening. We are trying to contain it. We're trying to devise ways and means. We're trying to find out technologies. We're trying to spend on infrastructure to reduce that loss. But food waste, when it comes to the consumers, it is mostly with respect to our behavior, with respect to our habits. The way a plate has been shown where we have left a lot of food. So it is happening. So there are different strategies to tackle food loss as well as food wastage. And as the discussion goes, we will have more. And maybe we will continue with this and we will continue our association with the WRI-India further. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, very encouraged to hear that. If I can just go to Mr. Sridhar online. Sir, are you able to hear us? If I can invite your reflections, please.
So definitely a couple of reflections from my side. Yes, we at Samanati, we work in the entire value chain. So we especially understand the food loss, right from farmer to a farmer collectives, to a trader, aggregator, this is a right the institution, bio, commodity and culture. So we really understand in terms of the food loss which is happening over there. And this is an important topic today that we are talking about. The three important things is one is the PPP partnership is very, very important because if all the stakeholders are aligned to this, definitely it will. Number two, I also went to the report. The initiative, there was one talking about 10 into 20 into 30, which talks about 10 retailers engaging with 20 suppliers and reduced by 50% by 2030 is a excellent statement and initiative and that can be actually incorporated. And when we talk of only retailers, rather we can talk of some of the other ecosystem players like tech players, they also play a crucial role over here, right? So that is a really good initiative. Finally, I think the behavioral change, lot of capacity building awareness, we always talk about the lower end, which is farmers, farmer collectives and all. But according to me, the behavioral change, which is at the civil society and the consumer, is very, very important. And that's where a lot of work needs to be done. And that will what will get the impact on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Somashekar, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, somewhat it is a advocacy campaign for myself only, because being from a government setup, we were worried about food security and also the management of the solid waste. But the missing link of this food loss and food waste, I mean, we are not acknowledged that much what is happening here. So it's a really enlightening for me, because when I called for this to attend this particular workshop, I mean, I gone through what corporation is going on and what are the things they are doing now. But it's really surprised me. Nearly 4,000 tons of food waste is generated every day. It goes to our landfills, and now some little bit of composting is also going on. So, I mean, the problem is huge, but still we are not quantified that burden of this problem. So it's a right step for me also, from the government organization, to get a close look into this aspect. So it will be very helpful in general to the government and also the public. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Vandana, if I can come to you now for your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations to WRI, Center for Responsible Business, and all the other organizations who have put together this policy brief. First of all, I found that this was the most comprehensive brief that I have seen on the subject. I would encourage each one of you to go through every line. Each line, every word is so important in this brief. Ruchika may not have been able to really emphasize and touch upon everything, but you must read every line of it. It's really wonderful. Secondly, Peter Drucker, the management guru, he gave us two concepts of modern management. One is management by objectives, and the second thing he said was what gets measured gets done. And I'm so glad to see that both these management concepts have been brought here to, to deal with this issue, which is one of the sustainable development goals and a huge challenge for the entire world. So my congratulations, and I would love to talk more about it in the coming session.
Thank you so much, everyone. If I can just take a minute, right, to quickly put out the key points. First of all, thank you for your words of encouragement. Sir, I think if I would like to start with you, we are very encouraged because if we can get one more champion on our side, we are very happy. And I think that is the purpose of these conversations. And the fact that you have a data or a data point to work with, I think is already a great place to start and recognize that more action needs to be done. I think what we heard was that measurement, and that's something that we definitely want to say that if we don't have the data, we are not really solving this, right? So I heard everyone say, I think, Mihil, you talked about the business case, that there is a very clear business case for any stakeholder that is involved, and it's high time that we take the initiative. And you talked about the holistic approach, which I think Mr. Sridharan also talked about, that the collaboration and different stakeholders that are coming together. And I think Mr. Sridhar also touched upon the power of magnifying, that one touching the other and the chain reaction that we can really trigger, that there is huge potential that we are talking about. I think behavior we heard, and that was something that came to my mind when Shweta was talking about that the reason why I also want to look at food loss and waste differently, because the way we tackle is very different. And sometimes it's easy to implement technology, it's easy to get an innovation, but it takes a long time to work with behaviors, and it starts with each one of us right now. So I think that was there. And one very interesting point, Dr. Dhingra, ICAR does great work, but you also touched upon on how the food moves from the organized and perhaps to the unorganized sector, which brings its own set of challenges and the solutions that we look at. So thank you so much for those opening remarks. I'm now just going to go to each one of you, because what we really need to know and want to understand that what's happening on the ground. So, Mahil, if I can come back to you, and from your experience, Netherlands is leading in a lot of initiatives. Some successful initiatives that you would briefly like to touch upon on food loss and waste, which could be extremely relevant for India, something that you're seeing happening on the ground here, and how the two countries could collaborate on this topic. So, over to you.
Well, I would like to continue on a distinction that has been made between food loss and waste. So, starting with the food loss side. Now, the Netherlands have been very, very lucky with our location being extremely small. I mean, 17 million people. It's population smaller than Delhi as such. But we've been very lucky. It means that we had to go global. It means we had to trade and we had to improve on our logistics. So actually, the answer is, and I'll hold it up, just a report that was published just in August last year by the Wageningen University, the #1 university, on agri-logistics in the Netherlands. And it shows how over the years, over the decades, over the centuries almost, thanks to these agri-logistics, we have become the #2 export of agricultural products. You can only do that if you reduce your food losses. Everywhere in the, I would prefer to use the word system, but let's keep calling it chain because that's the more familiar word for it. So I'll stick to that as far as the example on the food loss side. On the food waste side, I think what is interesting is the initiative which was mentioned also in your presentation, the Netherlands United Against Food Waste. It starts with measuring. And I think maybe one of the most important, and it's a feature that we have seen in the Netherlands very strongly, is the cooperation, what we call the Dutch triangle, the golden triangle, the Dutch diamond sometimes. It's the cooperation between government, business, civil society, and the universities, the knowledge centers. I think that's even more important than trying to create new legislation. Legislation is something you actually don't want to. You want to have initiatives taken by in this case, the retailers, for example. And we've seen in this campaign that we have a very strong initiative taken by these retailers. Sure, partly because of its saving money for them, for consumers, but also because these people working there really feel we are responsible. And what you now see is in the Netherlands that of all the goods that come into the retail and are sold to the consumers, actually 98.3% is actually sold. So there's only a waste of 1.7% at retailers level. The actual losses taking place is at the consumer level, at the hospitality level. Now there again, we have innovations indeed. It's taking behavior. That's why we have this campaign. Just to give you an example, it's creating a recipe book on what to do with the remains. And still in the Netherlands, 25% of the food that comes into the household is going to the waste bin. It's telling them, hey, do you know that if we would waste half, only 50%, I mean, this is the target for 2030, that would mean that we would have 600 in the Netherlands, 600 million meals per year extra. Talking about food security, right? It's giving infographics. I mean, you mentioned water, but making it understandable for the consumer. The water we use is the size of the biggest lake that we have in the Netherlands, the IJsselmeer. 50 times that size per year is the loss on water because of food loss and waste. It's making infographics like this that people understand. Bring it very close to them. That's the examples I would like to share at this moment with you on these food losses. And there are things that we can definitely share with India. However, I'll return to my opening remark. The Netherlands, very small. We were lucky. India, very big. Lots of people, quite a lot of people living here. So we have to adapt the solution that we found to the Indian situation. And I'll stick at that and come back later maybe to some of those examples. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those wonderful remarks. And Dr. Dhingra, if I can come to you, and I know ICAR does wonderful work. Today we'll stay with technology, and if you can share from your experience, and we heard that in Ruchika's presentation also, that innovation and technology have a big role to play when we look at reducing our food losses. So which technologies, according to you, hold good promise, and both for managing food loss or food waste, and how can we look at their scalability when we are talking about these technology? What is the role that different stakeholders need to play?
It's a pretty difficult question, very elaborate. The food commodities are very diverse. In India, I think we are producing more than 140 commodities. Almost anything which you can get in the world, we have agroclimatic regions, you can produce that. Now you see dragon fruit has come, and some other things which were not there, they have come. So it's very diverse. Each commodity has its own characteristics, and ICAR has tried to study the maturity indices. What is the right time to harvest that commodity? What are the pre-harvest, harvest, and then post-harvest methods which shall be adopted? So coming to that, a lot of emphasis is laid on the farmers and farm workers. You see that any commodity which will be produced by farmers, it will be harvested, handled by farmers, farm workers, men or women, right? Young and old. Then it is transported to the markets or transported to the processing units. Again, you are having a lot of people involved in that. And I think you all know what kind of educational status they have, what kind of economic status they have. If I am a farmer, if you tell me I don't get a economic benefit of adopting all those practices at the farm, I will be careless, right? I will just harvest. You tell me that I will tell you that for tomatoes, what is the right stage for harvesting, for making ketchup, for sending it to the local market, the different, right? But how will you tell it to the farm workers? How will you involve them? How will you enroll them? That is a big issue, right? We have technologies, we have do's and don'ts, we have best practices, we have chemical methods, we have mechanical methods, we have all kind of technologies. But adoption of that technology, we can spend money also, but then bringing in the human factor into that is the major problem. Even if you go and to the market in Delhi, you buy some apple or you buy some fruit, what will they do? For weighing, the retailer will put it in the pan, in a metal pan, he will throw it in the metal pan. And whenever he throws, I say, wait, yeah, you treat it like an infant, right? You treat all these commodities like infants, treat them with delicacy, right? So only the thing is only that we have to treat them with some softness, right? We have to treat them like infants. We cannot be harsh with the infants. You treat every produce like an infant, then you can think of that how we can improve the, because one small mechanical damage at the time of harvest, it can lead to different kind of biology, different kind of maturity, right? Then the fruit or vegetable or the grains, they have all different characteristics. We have different technologies. We have controlled it. We have bulk storage. We have bag storage for the grains, right? We have fumigation technologies for preventing the attack of insects and pests. Then we can do on a small scale for the farmers, but farmers don't have that kind of capacity. 70% of the grain which we produce is retained by the farmers. Only 30% is coming into the organized sector for the urban people, which the Food Corporation of India or Central Warehousing Corporation or State Warehousing Corporation, they procure it, they try to put it in the best practices, right? So then I would like to tell you that ICAR has also worked with these departments and ministries. We have assessed the losses in grain storage in organized sector, and the norms have been developed and then implemented by the ministry, which has resulted in a lot of good practices with the organized grain storage sector. Then what is, we have lack of cold storages and we have a fairly warm weather throughout the year in most parts of the country. So what kind of work we have done for reducing the temperature, right? That was very popular. Sometimes some politician told we go and buy the shoes in an air conditioned shop, but we buy the fruits and vegetable and food on the street. What happens is it is put up in the sun, rain, there is no shelter, there is no cooling. We have not yet developed sheltered places for marketing, right? Air cooled, sheltered places for the comfort of the people involved in that and for the benefit of the fruits. We have the technology, but have we invested in that? I had been to a small country in Pacific Islands, Fiji. I stayed there for 3 years and as an expert. They have very well sheltered markets where fruits and vegetables are retailed. And there you will have fans, some air cooling, not air conditioning, but also music. They also dance, they also stay there happy. Only then they can do the work correctly. So there are a lot of technologies for production, for transportation, for processing, and for consuming also. So food safety. How many of you have learned food safety in your colleges, in your education? If our food becomes unsafe, it is waste, right? But how many of you we go to the kitchen and see that it's the right temperature, whether our food is lying in the temperature danger zone? We have to shift it into the refrigerator. How many of we have checked the temperature in our refrigerators anytime? How many of us have? We spend a lot of money on our makeup, on our dresses for looking good. We spend on refrigerator, but how many of us are spending on some a good refrigerator, a deep freezer at home,
So,
or a
Dr.
small
Dhingra, if
dryer?
I may interrupt, I'm sorry. I think it's a very important question and we should come back to it and
We
maybe
can
if we
discuss
put
it
it.
for hours.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to admit that every panelist can get a day to themselves and we will still not be done. So, request that, if we can. So, if Sridhar, I can come to you, right? Because you talked about you work with the entire value chain. If you can share your experiences, that how through infrastructure or technical assistance or financial assistance, what do farmers need or what is it that's happening on the ground? And perhaps, Dr. Dhingra talked about also creating the capacity. You have the technology, but how do you create the capacity between the smallholder farmers? If you can share that from your experience, would be great. Thank you.
Very important is when we talk of the entire cycle, we are talking of pre-production, production, and post-harvest. Definitely, there are challenges in terms of the food loss, and that really has a big impact on the food security and the income generation. Coming to the technology, we have tech players who have got a good solution. But however, how the adoption is happening is not right. That's where we at Samunati we engage with these smallholder farmers through the collectives, through the FPOs, and explain them in terms of the process. And definitely, once it is done, it really tantamount to what is the price and is there a finance on it. So, what Samunati does is we actually customize a product in collaboration with the technology solution provider. Let me give an example. When we are talking of a fruit loss on harvest, we take a case of a horticulture. We provide that entire solar trader to the farmer by giving them a loan. With the intention of, okay, now that activity has happened, farmer is able to keep it in a storage and is also able to process it. What next? So Samunati also helps in connecting them to a market, right? So that is what the role of community and many of the ecosystem players should also look at that way rather than looking at more as a transaction. You should look at end-to-end relationship, how this can add value, not only to the smallholder farmers and also to the value chain player. If I can give another example, you can also look at a institutional buyer of a commodity can play an active role over here, right? We can always come and talk about the quality specifications, we can talk about the logistics part of it, and we can say, hey, definitely at a smallholder farmer, creating so much of infrastructure is not possible. Despite there could be financing options, but there are a lot of other challenges at the smallholder farmer level. If a institutional buyer says, okay, you just have to take care of the quality specifications, we will take care of the logistics and we will take it out. And we will on harvest pick it up and keep it with us. So that's where someone will be at a continuous level. We do this activity for the smallholder farmers, wherein immediately on harvest, we understand the institutional buyer, their requirements. We do the end-to-end process in terms of collecting the harvest, keeping it in the warehouse, storage, and slowly we release it to the institutional buyer because it's a proper planning that we have done, connecting all the ecosystem players. So if you try to do it at an individual level, it doesn't work. But a collaborative effort where you take all the stakeholders in confidence and understand their requirements and you come out with a solution. That's where Samruddhi does this activity in a way where not only look at only a finance aspect, but at end to end. So we actually provide access to finance, and access to finance cannot be a one product fits all. Sir spoke about cold storage. There are solar dryers available. There are solar refrigerations available, and every crops has got a different characteristics. So you need to understand those characteristics, and accordingly you have to look at how do you provide the solution to the end farmer so that it becomes usable and sustainable for him also. So that is what has been Samruddhi's endeavor in this entire journey. And coming to the capacity building, it's a continuous process. It cannot be done at a one time. It's a continuous process wherein we not only do it to the farmer collectors and the smallholder farmers, but sometimes we also bring in the institutional buyer or the ecosystem buyer, including the technology company, so that we also make them aware how you also contribute to the entire process, so that collectively the whatever the impact that needs to be done is achieved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those lovely examples. Dr. Soma Shekhar, coming to you. From your work, what is the MCD doing to tackle food waste? And from your experience, and what is the role of different stakeholders, whether it be consumers, small businesses, civil society? What do you think could be, to take this conversation at a much larger scale?
So municipal corporation means it has to be a legal measure. So we consider solid waste management is a major issue. So under this, in fact, the food waste is also is a part of it, part of the biodegradable waste. So I think right from 2018 we have solid waste management bylaws, and accordingly things have been placed to address the issue. So coming on to the food waste with respect to the commercial establishments, yes, all hotels, restaurants, they have to comply the directions given in the bylaws. So there are authorized waste disposers are there. They can liaison with those people to, I mean, dispose the food waste generated within their premises. For that, even they are paying user charges. For example, for any restaurant it is about 2000 rupees per month, whereas for a 3-star hotel it is about 3000, whereas for a 5-star it is 5000 rupees per month. So if there is any violation in complying the bylaws, they are penalized. And I think for 5-star hotels, star hotels, it is about 50,000 rupees for a single violation, whereas for a regular restaurant it is about 20,000 rupees. So coming on to the, I mean, the public or the residential units or housing societies, I mean, residential housing societies have been considered as bulk generators. Apart from it, some of the commercial establishments like major hotels, banquet halls, they are also be considered as bulk generators. So they have their own mechanical composting unit should be there in the premises. There should be zero waste generation within that particular residential units. So even they are bound by the bylaws. If there is violation, even they have penalizing amount is there. So with respect to the laws, these are the things are available. But the connect between these, I mean, the law is there for ensuring the food security. The law is there to dispose the waste, but we don't have anything how to reduce it. So that is the main issue. So I mean, we have to have liaison with the stakeholders, mainly with respect to the commercial establishments, major institutions, then hotels, restaurants, banquet halls. So these people has to be aware about these things. They should be sensitized how to reduce food waste, and how to, even if there is, I mean, in excess food is there, then how to redistribute with liaising with some of the NGOs or any self groups. They can help in this regard. I mean, personally, what I see is this issue has not been highlighted. I mean, for the first time, even I am aware about these things. Then only in fact, I interacted with some of the industry people. So, in case of small restaurants, the leftovers are there. They say it is very minimal. So usually every day a person authorized by the corporation will take it to the nearest composting hub, or some people may take you to piggeries to feed the pigs. Whereas in banqueting, there is a possibility of overproduction or over preparation. That is the major issue. But still, most of the people doesn't acknowledge that one. So because of the fear of this law and all. So even though, I mean, measures have been advocated, but still many of them are not complying the manner which is should have been done it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's interesting you say that they can tie up with civil society. So we have Vandana here, who's actually running an NGO for packaged food and has done wonderful work in diverting food from being destroyed or being sent to landfill. So Vandana, just want to understand from you that how the India Food Banking Network has been collaborating with the food industry stakeholders, in ensuring food recovery, in minimizing waste, and what strategies have proven successful for you in your model.
Yeah. So a lot of food goes waste on the shelves and warehouses of the food companies. This is the packaged processed food industry, and it was going waste, it was going to the landfill, and that's where our work came into the picture. India Food Banking Network, we have food banks which are basically not for profit organizations. We have 55 food banks at the moment, and what we do is that the food companies, when their products on the shelves of the retail sector or in their warehouses reaches closer to shelf life, that could be depending on company policy 30 days before their best before date or 45 days before the best before date, what happens is that these companies stop invoicing them. They don't send them out for sale anymore, and in fact they used to lie around in their warehouses occupying valuable warehouse space, and then ultimately they'd go either for animal feedstock or composting or maybe landfills also. And that's where we came into the picture. What we do is that we pick up these produce the packaged food from the food industry for 30 days or 45 days before the best before date, and we redistribute it like you were talking, and we redistribute it. This is perfectly safe food which is much before the best before date. Nowhere should it be thought that this is expired food or unsafe food. This is perfectly safe food which still has a shelf life of 30 to 45 days, and we distribute it to people in need. This could be old age homes, homeless shelters, in bastis, in slums, etc. And especially during the pandemic and during disasters like your floods, etc., we have found that these have come in so handy because even when we distribute the ration kits, in disasters, people don't have today in floods. They cannot all the time cook and eat their rice and dal. They also need some packaged food which are ready to eat and which they can consume without having this. So it has really worked out well. So if you will see, it works out well from the point of view of reducing food waste, reducing food going into the landfill and generating greenhouse gases, and also at the same time helping out with hunger and food security issues. So a lot of food companies are supporting us. It has not been an easy journey. We have been at it for the last 11 years. It's taking time for the food companies to come on board. There are certain issues which I can come to a little later, time permitting. And we need to make sure that all this food, none of it goes waste, but is instead brought back and distributed to people who can consume it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've absolutely loved this first round because I think we have different stakeholders doing different things, and it's interesting to see how you can actually help each other out. But a few very interesting things, Mehul, you talked about the power of data, you've talked about measurement, but you also showed that how if we convert that information into consumable bites, right, it has to be relatable. We could have very good data, but if we can't understand, if we can't access, or if we can't comprehend or relate it to ourselves, perhaps we will limit the action. So I really took that. It was very interesting in terms of legislation, your approach, and I think maybe your point of adapting solutions here. And Dr. Somashekar talked about the role of legislation and how that's actually starting as a point. And he recognized that legislation can perhaps expand, or we can start looking at prevention of waste. That we do a good job of recognizing that this is waste. We do have laws which say how to manage that waste, but how about reducing that waste? So I think that is really a positive feedback, and it's great that you've talked about collaboration and getting the different stakeholders, right? And I think a point that Dr. Dhingra made, that you have the technologies, but how do you upscale, and the human element, right? And I think Sridhar there then talked about a solution that's working, and he's also saying that yes, perhaps you look a little beyond what is your immediate role, that it's not just financing, but it is capacity, it is understanding the end-to-end picture, it is supporting the smallholder farmers or the vulnerable stakeholders with something that they are not best placed to manage, right? So the role that we look at it in managing food loss and waste also perhaps need to be re-examined. So it was very interesting because you brought the last point I expected in technology was a human touch, which is very important, that technology will just go so far as the human using it and being able to accept it. And I think perhaps the business case that Mihil talked about is what we can look for developing, with your stakeholders, that why businesses, why restaurants should actually look at reducing or preventing that waste in the first place, and how that could be done. So I thought that there were a lot of points, and the cross learning that we were hoping for that this panel would bring would definitely, I saw lots of examples in that. I'm sure I've not been able to capture all the discussions, but I would like to hand it back again to all of you. 3 minutes each, but really, what is the way forward? Those top 2-3 things that come to your mind if we want food loss and waste and reducing it to become a priority for us. What is it that we can do, should do, from your perspective, your role? So something, if you can, and Mihil, again, I'll start with you.
Yes, well, thank you. And first, I was thinking of when I heard speak about the municipality, I was thinking, well, to stay in the food loss and waste terms, do we want the carrot or the stick? I prefer them to eat the carrot to reduce the food waste, I would say, instead of the stick. But I understand that we sometimes need the stick as well. And just to give a few examples on continuing on what Dr. Dhingra said, the Netherlands, as an initiative by Champions 12.3, actually, the Biocrop Science, together with Wageningen University, produced the Ansel variety of tomato seed, which has an extremely longer shelf life. It was specifically developed for India. That's an example which we stimulated, that Wageningen University did. Another one also related again to these tomatoes. And interestingly enough, you mentioned the farmers knowing when to bring it to processing, when to bring it to the market. We did a study in Madhya Pradesh. We financed a study executed by Solidaridad to figure out the tomato value chain in Madhya Pradesh. Because according to the processing industry, they didn't get the right tomatoes. The farmers weren't producing the right tomatoes. It turns out that most of the farmers actually didn't know that there was such a big difference. The other thing was they didn't know when to market their tomatoes to get the right price. And they said, well, yeah, these processing tomatoes, they don't give me the price that I can get into the market. So that's initiatives where we have strictly supported on these food loss and waste side. Another initiative, and I think it's something that we have to see how we can translate our experience to the Indian circumstances. Just a few months ago, I had a very interesting seminar on food waste together with ITCF SAN in Mumbai. And one of the things that we are talking about now is creating this food waste monitor, really to measure. And then we start at a very small, well, relatively small scale, on a Mumbai scale. For the Netherlands, that's still extremely big, but at least we can say, okay, let's try it out in Mumbai, how to measure the food waste. Because without measuring, indeed, we will not know where the hotspots are, how we can intervene. And then finally, maybe some of the innovative developments that we've seen, talking about restaurants. There is a Dutch company that developed a waste bin which actually measures the waste that every restaurant throws into it. And at the end of the day, just gives a ticket saying, hey, you just thrown away 150 euros tonight. So that the chef knows the next day, okay, I have to be careful what I buy and what I serve actually. And he will, again, it sometimes it's just looking at the wallet of the consumer, of the chefs, of the retailers to make them aware of what is possible. Yeah, I'll keep it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Some very interesting ideas. Dr. Dhingra, your closing remarks, sir.
Here, I would like to first of all thank the organizers. I would like to share some what ICR is doing. So we started with assessment of post-harvest losses, the word that measurement, the data which had come 15,270 lakh crores, something like that. This is by NABCOS, that methodology that was finalized by ICAR on assessment of post-harvest losses of 45 crop commodities. Then we collaborate with organizations like Food Corporation of India, and currently, recently, last month we have signed one MOU with Department of Consumer Affairs. They are storing pulses. You know, the pulses is a problem now in India. We are also producing, we are also importing. So there are two issues in that. So there is going to be a 3 years long study. So we will study what are the bottlenecks, what are the interventions which we can make so that we can reduce the post-harvest losses. And then we are also conducting R&D, which is based on the requirement of the entrepreneurs. And I'm very lucky that I interacted with Deepak Rajmohan Green Pots. So I'm going to link up with scientists in ICAR so that he can get his product tested and validated, right? So these are the issues. Then what we do is, apart from R&D, apart from teaching, and then there is a lot of work which is being done on capacity building. We organize trainings, right? We organize trainings on food processing. We organize trainings on post-harvest management. We organize trainings for farmers. We organize trainings for entrepreneurs. India is a big country. We have large food manufacturers. We have very tiny food manufacturers. So ICR is just like it is farmer centric, but we are focusing more on small entrepreneurs. They don't have deep pockets. They can't spend a lot of money. So we are giving them technical knowledge as well as management knowledge. And many times we are also making detailed project reports for them so that they can go to the banks for taking loans. And the another thing which we have recently started is, as Dr. Shomasekar told, and it's a problem with everywhere, waste. From industry also there is a waste. As Vandana ji told, they are doing good work. I think it's a new knowledge for me. And we are going to take them on board in our next meeting in our working groups. We have working groups also, which are dealing with post-harvest losses. We have one on grain storage, but we are going to create other on post-harvest losses. What I waste to wealth. So if the potatoes, if we are not grading it at the farmer's level, as Sridhar ji was also telling, it comes to the industry, and a lot of waste is created at that level. Even when we are peeling, so what to do with the peel? It's a waste. Right? If there is a unit, they will bring a lot of peel, tons of peels. We are cutting the potatoes, we are washing it, a lot of starch is coming out. Some of the fried potatoes, they go waste. How to utilize them? So we are now trying to work on secondary agriculture. This is a concept which we have introduced, right? So converting these like wheat bran, potato peel, or waste of the fruits and vegetables, like we have oil seeds, we are taking out oil cake, it goes for animal feeding. And sometimes we're trying to now extract protein isolate from them, right? So this is high value. So that will not remain waste. Whatever today we are getting waste, if we can convert this waste to wealth by technological intervention, the waste will also have value. So people will stop putting it in the landfill. They will try to extract some valuable compounds from them. We are importing those compounds.
Great.
Right?
Thank you.
We have nutraceuticals, we have pharmacological compounds which we are importing from other countries. So we can do that in India. And from waste to wealth, we are starting our effort in one institute in Ranchi, so which will be focusing on secondary agriculture. So converting waste of the agricultural produce or the processing industry or the food which is wasted at home. So how we can convert it into wealth, that will be another line of action which will then reduce that waste. That waste will become non-waste. We will do that. Thank you so much.
Guys, again for interrupting. But Sridhar, if I can come to you now for those 2-3 points that you think absolutely need to be taken for us to move ahead in this direction.
Thanks, Devyani. I think we are talking of food loss, right? So one of the important point which I am looking at is we have to align the incentives across the value chain. Today, at a smallholder farmer level, we are actually giving them with a lot of grants, subsidies, and all. Definitely, it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. But if we are able to align some incentives where they are able to actually, adopt the package of practices and that translate to a lesser food loss. I think some incentives can be built in, like the DPT and all what they are currently giving. So aligning the incentive not only at the small to farmer level, but across the value chain right up to the institutional buyer. I think it's an important direction. And there could be a lot of things that can be done when you go above the value chain, where it can be in the form of a rebate, it can be in the form of a GST, something we can work it out. So this is an important topic. So aligning incentives is something which we need to really look at it. Very important for doing all those things. Today, everybody is talking of AgTech, FinTech, digitization, collecting information and all. But if you go and talk to anyone, data is not available. So if you can have the technology which is already talked of onboarding the farmer to getting all the information sort about it, and they also have data to the extent of how much yield has come, what is the quality of yield that has come, what. So along with that, if they are also able to capture what is the third grade quality or the loss which the individual smallholder farmer has got, and that can be the data point for to reflect on for everybody and see okay what measures can be taken. So again, a technology is very important because it will also help you to collect a lot of data which can help you to put in more futuristic policies and also a lot of capacity building work that can be done. Finally, the third important point according to me is we also were talking about climate change and how the greenhouse gas emission, right? Here there is a lot of work is already happening, which is going to create impact at the farmer level and the producer level. But I think this is also very important in terms of behavioral change and how this greenhouse gas emission, because Vandana ma'am spoke about the food waste going into the landfill. Can we also look at some of the technology which is available where it can get into a biogas and that goes as a fertilizer to the farmer, and also it can go as a gas. Instead of buying a cylinder, they can actually use this as a cooking this thing. So there are a lot of things which is available which I think we need to look at it. And the starting point is from the consumer, right? And that is how we have to think through and get into this climate smart greenhouse gas emission, which is not only for the smallholder farmer when we are looking at a farm level, but it's across the value chain, across right up to the civil society and the consumer. There also we need to really lot of policy advocacy required, where a citizen understands, okay, this is what it is, and he can really have a good transformation. Thank you.
So, in my view, it is an operational research question now. The lifestyle is directly responsible for the food waste. So, it's quite evident as you observe around you whenever you go in a restaurant or anything like that. So, with respect, if it is a small dhaba, I mean, I don't think so. There is much food leftovers over there. Whereas when you come across to a big restaurant, I mean, most of the portions have been left over. But now there is a tendency, if it is large amount is leftover is there, people will ask to pack it to the home. It is a good indication that at least some of the people are, I mean, overcoming that inhibition, that not to take the, I mean, leftover food to home. So, whereas I mean, in case of food waste, definitely there is a customer is there and another one is caterer is there. In case of, I mean, what I've discussed with some of the stakeholders in this regard, I mean, no caterer will make loss with respect to the food waste. It definitely comes last to the customer. It is the loss for the customer, not for the caterer, because he has earned money out of it. He's not losing anything. So if you're not eaten that food, you are losing. So I mean, we think over it. I mean, even if we organize any functions, how many items has to be there, how minimize. The one good thing what I see is in especially in northern India. I'm from Mysore. Uh, in fact, two people will eat one masala dosa. These things won't happen in Mysore and Bangalore. So that is a good thing. So some of the things are there, so we can learn from those things, and we have to aware in this regard to the general public and also the stakeholders. Thank you.
Yes, so as I was talking about the packaged food industry, we work with almost all the big food companies. You have Mondelez, Nestle, ITC, Hindustan Unilever, and the others. Now, these companies, they have their reputation to protect, and they're very concerned about liability issues. They do not want that they give their surplus food, and should God forbid anything go wrong, they would be held liable. And since every package carries their name, so it is, it's very easy to become breaking news, on television and elsewhere. So that is why that prevents them from, going wholeheartedly and donating all their surplus excess food to us. So here what can help is a Good Samaritan Act. US and Europe and many other countries, they have this Good Samaritan Act, whereby anybody who makes a donation in good faith of good quality, safe food is, protected from liability. But we do not have that Good Samaritan Act in India. Very recently, a couple of years back, that this Good Samaritan Act had been passed for accident cases. Before that, nobody was willing to stop and help an accident victim because they thought कि बाद में हमें मुसीबत में आएंगे. So, but once this Good Samaritan Act was passed, now we don't think twice about stopping and helping a accident. A similar kind of Good Samaritan Act is important for the donation of food from the food industry, and that would help us to mobilize, more and almost all the surplus that exists, both in the packaged food industry and also in the cooked food space. Today, the Horeca, the hotels, restaurants, everybody, they are also very concerned about liability issue because especially cooked food gets, spoiled even faster. It has got a very short shelf life. But with the coming of a Good Samaritan Act like this, so I would encourage all of us to get together and see how we can, get such an act passed, and that would really help. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think before I come to the audience for their questions, Ruchika, I would like to invite you because you've been hearing, right? And we heard about knowledge, measuring, data. But from your perspective, anything that you felt can be added to the conversation that we have had here, one. Two, also, is there the network of Friends of Champions of 12.3? Because one thing we did hear was on how we need to collaborate, how we need to share information, how we need to come together. So if you can touch upon those two questions, I'll invite your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Devyani. I think this has been an absolutely, inspiring panel. Lot of good sort of focused interventions around key issues that we need to look at. And then one thing that kept coming to my mind was we also, we need to create more awareness. It is about inspiring, mobilizing action, which requires more robust data based approach to also look at what really are the key challenges and solution for, because we have different kind of stakeholders. We need to inspire more within the government action. There's a lot happening, which we heard from both ICAR and MCD colleagues here, but also how do we get some of this mainstreamed essentially in terms of what we do. So we would need more data in terms of what the different socio-economic environmental benefits, for instance, could be of reducing food loss and weight. How does nutrition, for instance, plays a role within that becomes important. And I think, Mihil, you touched upon the work that you were doing in you supported in MP on the tomato loss studies. I think we need actually a lot more of geography specific, crop commodity wise, what are the key challenges of in a particular supply chain which need to be reduced. And we've also doing one study incidentally in MP on looking at tomato, and we realizing also that you need to, and Shweta is the one who's leading that work, and we realize that there's a lot of supply chain barriers that need to be reduced. So how do we look at some of those collectively? So more data based evidence based research. Behavioral change was talked about a lot, and I think we need more actually again evidence-based support on what needs to be done, municipalities, how do we work with consumers to inspire action, so which could actually lead to creating that movement that we are talking about. And last, in terms of what the friends could do, we've actually seen the friends network grow over the last year and a half, a lot more sort of openness to see how what we can do together. And I see Deepak, of course, is there, Ashna is there from Sangam. I think we had a OTP colleague also, if I recall, who was in the room. And of course, a lot of friends are sitting here. And of course, Food and Land Use Coalition has been supporting this work. So how do we sort of look at, what the network can do together? A lot of it might be just about creating awareness, but I think what Vandana said, we also need to see collectively if we can think about what the strategies could be when we are thinking about some of these regulations. How do we sort of inspire action? And we look at ICR and, Mr. Somashekar, to you as well, in terms of how we can get, would pilots help? Can we think about doing pilots, for instance, here in Delhi? Would that, how do we really kind of come up with a path forward essentially? And back to you, Devyani, with that.
Thank you so much. So I think we have 15 minutes more. Yeah. So I'm going to open up for the audience. I think we have a few questions in the audience. I request you to keep it brief. And if you want to address it to any particular speaker.
Thanks, sir. I'm Deepak Maheshwari. I'm a senior visiting fellow with ICRIER. Just 4 quick points. And these are all basically more about buffet type of arrangements. One is I've seen in some places, especially in some industrial canteens, for example, what they do, they place a thali in a showcase. So before you go and pick up what you want, you can actually see everything which is on the menu that day. So this is one thing which has actually resulted in a significant food loss there, food waste there. And thanks for that knowledge today. Second thing was that in one particular education institution, I noticed that there was a huge canteen, like few thousand students were eating there every day. Every day, all that they do is they put, just like Mihil mentioned in terms of the food wastage there. So they just put a board how much food was wasted yesterday. It's just that information. There's no other gyan or anything mentioned. And this is again something which they sort of chart over the months, and they have seen that this has a nudging impact on people. 2 other things which have been quite effective. One is a bite-sized servings. So sometimes you have fruits or something, some pieces which are really big. So instead of that, if you have smaller pieces, then people can do that. And the last is about better labeling. So if there are better labels about what all is there, so some people will take something and then they might not actually like or would take it. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think some very interesting examples of how to nudge behavior.
Very interesting conversation. So one thing wanted to just get through is like I've been following what is happening in Netherlands quite closely, and recently I wrote an article on agri-tech in Netherlands as well. One thing which is very fascinating is the collaboration between the public, private, and the academics. Would love to understand more like how that can be translated for India in specific. So just to give you an example, right? So we as a company, we are developing post-harvest solutions to extend the shelf life of fruits and vegetables. And we have been on the ground to do a lot of studies on the supply chain. So if we take a commodity like grapes, we have mapped out all the supply chain from one market to another market, what quality is gone. So we've collected a lot of data. We would love to put that on public forum for others to use it, but we want to make sure that that's channelized well. So would love to understand how that was done in Netherlands and what's been the learning there, if that something can be translated here in India.
Actually, a very difficult question. It's so embedded in our genetics that it's almost impossible to answer how did we do this in the Netherlands. This started really ages ago when farmers had to create dams around their lands, and one farmer can't build a dam, so they needed to work together. So they started creating cooperatives, but they needed government for financing, for creating pumps to pump out the water. As you probably know, the Netherlands is for 50% below sea level, so we do need some pumps once in a while. So it's very difficult to say, but it is so embedded that it's only natural that Wageningen University, I mean, to become the #1 agricultural university, they have to work with the field, with the farmers, with the processors, because they have to show their relevance for the sector. Otherwise, I mean, they can create fantastic academics, but those will be just academics. You really have to be connected to the field. Um, Again, it's a culture. Um, I've been now here for 2.5 years. Yes, it will be quite a culture change, I think, also for India to work together like this. There is, and I think I may allow me to say this as a foreigner, but there is a lot of silos in India, and I see you nodding. So happy for me that you agree to that. But that's the challenge, really, I think, and I think that India government is working very hard on breaking down these silos. But again, that's also a culture which will take time. So I find it very hard to actually answer your question. Sorry.
No, but I think just to add, I think we heard from Dr. Dhingra that he was happy to connect, and let's see if that becomes an example and we can. So I would leave it at that. It is a difficult conversation, but I think you may have a start here working with the research institute. I think there was a question here. Maybe we can take three. I will come to you. We'll take three quick questions. Please keep them short. Yeah?
Sure. Hi, I'm Manas from Leap Cities. My question is actually about urban agriculture. One way I think of agriculture is, especially for fruits and vegetables, the farmer gets somewhere between 10 to 20% of what we pay at the shop. And therefore, 80 to 90% is going towards transportation, losses, and profits. And one solution could be to bring production much closer to consumption. I know WRI has started doing some work, but yet on the bigger picture, there's almost zero work seems to be happening on urban and really near peri-urban agriculture. And I just wonder if any of you have thoughts around how agriculture can be integrated better into our infrastructure, bring it closer to cities, and address some of these issues.
One of the most staple or generic advices given in order to combat food loss and food waste is investing in cold chain infrastructure, cold chain logistics, refrigeration. However, refrigerants themselves, primarily the chlorofluorocarbons, are themselves emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. So, if we leave food to waste and rot, that leads to emissions. And the solution, the primary solution itself also is an, emitter. So, how do we address that twin dichotomy? Thank you.
One of the things that we are realizing, and I'll talk from a tomato example, is there's a lot of focus on cold supply chains as a solution for reducing food loss and waste, but it's actually not the full solution. There are a lot more focus that needs to be on technological innovation or infrastructure, post-harvest management that can happen at the farm gate. There's a lot of focus that's needed on behavioral change. So the focus on cooling solutions only as the solution itself is something which we need to question, and I'll stop at that.
Hi, I'm Shireen from Rochefort Technologies. I'm an entrepreneur. So thank you for the excellent gathering and all the knowledge sharing. My question is like, India has slipped to 107th in hunger index. So like, it's quite ironic. On the other hand, FCI godowns like 40,000 metric tons food is rotting. So like, it's quite, I mean, what should we do to fill this gap? No matter how many conferences we do these kind of gatherings, all the things, but it's quite like it's few drops in the ocean. If government won't come into this, we cannot fill this gap, the hunger and food rotting. I mean, we are having so much food which is rotting in the godowns, and on the other side, our population is like dying out of hunger. So, like, what should we do? What are the measures we can take for this thing? Yeah.
It needs to be brought together much quicker. And I think
Yes.
that's the point that everyone was making, that we look at there is innovation happening, there are solutions happening. But I think, Dr. Dhingra, you also referred to that you're working with the Food Corporation.
Yes, ICAR and
Yeah,
yes.
once you told her a lot
Yes.
of food is lying rotting. This is misconception. Nowadays, it is not happening. You go to the silos, you go to the storages. The government is very proactive. Right? If there is a loss, if I am owning and managing that facility, if I have been given say 100 kg grain, and I have to give back 100 kg. If I am not giving back, I have to pay for that. Right? So I am taking all the care of the grain so that I can return that and I can make money out of it. So that sort of thing, there could be some pictures over here and there. There could be some stray incidents, something like a building breaks and then there is a wetting and a lot goes waste. That doesn't mean it is going rotting. So we are very careful about our food. And I think in India, the wastage is lesser than what we are reporting. That will come when the more data comes, right?
So
Because we are very price sensitive. You go to any retail market in the evening, what happens is, just a minute, I will give. If I go to a super bazaar where I'm not the owner of the fruits and vegetables, I cannot change the price. So even if the commodity is wilting and the quality is going down, I'm unable to reduce the price, right? And there is no buyer. But if I am owning, I'm putting it on a cart from morning until evening. I'm wearing the price, and by evening 6, as a retailer, I'm trying to get rid of every stuff. So I'm going to pack everything and give it. By the evening, when I go out of my office, there are too few vendors. They will just wave their hand. If they have okra, if they have tomatoes, they'll say, okay, you take it in 30 rupees, you take it in 100 rupees, take everything in 100 rupees. Just take it, I go home, you go home. So we are that, if I'm taking that, I'm putting in refrigerator, I'm consuming it. So we are very cautious about everything. The only thing is, wherever there is no control, it goes with.
So, if I may request, if you can continue this conversation, I think the point also perhaps to understand what we said is we need to understand the hotspots. We need to put that data out there for public consumption, right? And I think the onus can't be put on any one stakeholder, right? The government definitely needs to get in, but all of us sitting in this room have a role to play. I mean, the plate was not the government. Let's be very honest. The plate was us. Right? And the thing is, because we don't measure it, we think it's small, we don't add up. We have a much larger footprint. And I think that is where it's important to have that approach of the whole value chain. Who is responsible for what is happening where? It's a very pertinent question. But I think what we perhaps have to do is we are trying to answer it without having all the information on hands and trying to make it responsible. Yes, what you said was perhaps happening, but we've also heard that there's a lot of good action that started happening. So that's where I would leave it. I think for me, if I try to summarize, but it was good to know that there are good examples. You talked about customization. I think legislation has a very important role to play. It may not be the stick. It could actually be through the Good Samaritan Act, could actually be a carrot that's coming through legislation. We could look at pilots. He talked about, working with a particular area and saying that we will reduce our waste. Why don't we look at something of that sort, right? Something that ICAR is doing, can it be tied up with Samanati, right? And they are working with farmers on the ground, and can we test out? We've talked about green pods and ICAR. So I think there is definitely encouraging news. We all need to come together. Personally, I would like to see a lot more logos, on the Friends for Actions 12.3, and not just for the logo, but for action. Where do you want to take it? And I think if we can start from this room, and I'm sorry, I'm taking the liberty here. Why don't all of us, if we are having food here, take a picture? We're good at social media, quite a few of us. Yeah, I'll come and take help. I'm nonsense at it. But why don't we take a picture of the empty plate and put it up and tag Connect Karo and said, today I made a pledge, I will not waste my food. And it can start from all of us, right? It can mean that what I bring into the house, I will minimize my waste. I will ask the person who's selling to see how he can introduce measures, so everywhere there is a role that all of us have to play, right? What we heard, it starts from the farmer, it comes to us. Right? And along that chain, everybody has to understand what is the role that they play. We are sitting, so many of us. I think that would be a positive movement, and that's action right now. I don't need to wait to go home, to understand, to read about it and say, okay, today my plate is going to be empty. I am not going to leave a grain. So with that, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much. I think it's always a learning. It's a topic very close to our heart, and we will continue. And let's, Ruchika, get together. I think there are certain actions that we can definitely take ahead. Sridhar, thank you so much for your time. We couldn't have you in person, but that did not take away from your contribution at all. Thank you so ever much. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. All the esteemed speakers, participants, and WRI-India team for putting the session together. Now I would request all the speakers for just a photograph with the T20 policy brief, if we can. And also, like Divyani said, not everybody is a producer or wholesaler, but everybody is a consumer. So the action can start from you. Thank you.